research group works on carbon storage. And carbon storage is the second half of carbon capture and storage. And so we do a wide range of things, everywhere from looking at the very detailed sort of physical processes of flow through porous media, and it's really a blast. We X-ray rocks, we put CO2 in them, and then we develop mathematical models and see how accurately we can predict exactly where the CO2 is. And you might be going, well, why do you do that? We do it because we're trying to build confidence at every single scale, at the pore scale, at the core scale, and then eventually at the field scale, that we know what happens when we put CO2 underground. So that's one of the main things. But we also have more of a pragmatic applied focus as well. So we're looking at what would make a good cap rock for a geologic storage reservoir. We're looking at new monitoring techniques. Everyone wants to know if it's leaking. How would you know? So we've developed a new method that basically you can drive around on a car or a cart or a mule. We've even done that, measuring CO2 and C12 and C13 isotopes. And it turns out it's a fabulous way to detect leaks, which I think is a really important aspect. Work on long-term risk assessment. There are all kinds of, so one of the big questions is, if you put CO2 underground today, is it going to get progressively riskier over time? Is it going to, fine today, but 100 years from now start leaking? So early on, I developed this idea that there's a risk profile that starts out, the risk is very low because you don't have CO2 underground, and eventually it grows and grows as you put more CO2 underground and you build up the pressure. But then when you stop injection, then the risks will start going down. Number one, because the pressure is decreased, but there are also all these secondary trapping mechanisms that make it so that CO2 could be permanently attached to the rocks or permanently trapped in the pore spaces. So we do a lot of research on that. So that's kind of the span of things I work on in my lab. So sort of the key idea about this technology is you can cover very large spatial areas. So for example, you could cover an area the size of San Francisco. And if you think about a CO2 plume from a big 500 megawatt power plant that's been injected underground for 30 years, that's sort of going to be the size of San Francisco. So it turns out with these sort of on-the-fly techniques, you could measure that in about a 2-week period, which becomes quite practical in terms of ability to do repeat monitoring. So the more bells and whistles we put on, if it slows down our acquisition rate, that would be a challenge. And the other problem is, this is very technical, if you really want to look at these covariances, it has to be in the exact same gas sample. So you need probably multiple lasers, basically detecting the concentration of these features in the same chamber.
So this is some mobile facility kind of thing?
Yeah, so basically the box is about this big, and our first deployment we put it in the back of a wagon basically, and graduate students and postdocs dragged it through an area where there was a known CO2 release, an intentional release. So that worked great. So then the next deployment we wanted to do something on a very large scale, so we went to the Crystal Geyser area, because there are many known natural CO2 seeps there, and we intended to put it on an ATV, but it turns out it's not legal to drive an ATV, so they said, well, we'll do it on mules. So we actually did a 3-week survey on mules. It was amazing, the most high-tech of instruments, this laser diagnostic with batteries, and then the oldest form of transportation, a mule, tromping through the desert out in the Crystal Geyser, and it worked there too.